Budget or the lowest tier cards always fascinate me, because usually they show how far technology has come and how much is still ahead. This is the RTX 5050, a very controversial card which I tend to like. Not the controversies, but the card itself, and that with a lot of caveats. Let me explain. It's supposed to cost $250, but now it's still either not in stock or going for $300–350. I'll leave some links in the description, you can check the price in your region. But at the end of July of 2025 it makes the RTX 5060 look good, because now they cost the same and people of course will choose more powerful card despite of 5060's reputation. But let's imagine that it became possible to buy 5050 for the recommended price. Let's see how it performs and if 8 gigs of memory holding this card back. Let's start with Alan Wake 2. First in native FullHD with high preset and without any RT extras, just to get some base raw numbers. With that we can see a very smooth time graph, with no lags or stutters. Also about half a gigabyte of free video memory and about 50 frames per second on average. From here we can do a lot of things to get better results, and exact steps would depend on your preferences. I'll try to show different approaches. Of course, the simplest way is just to lower the settings, but that's trite and obvious. Let's test something new. Let's generate some frames. After all, a multi-frame gen is a feature of a 5000 series GPUs, so let's see how well it would work on an entry-level card. And yeah, with 4x generation the numbers are impressive. The counter shows from 140 to 160 frames. And it didn't feel like too much of input lag was introduced, despite the frame graph looking a bit more bumpy. Also, I thought that generation will eat all available memory, but there is still about 500 megabytes left. Also, this technology has its downsides, and they were visible. Those are the artifacts around small and moving objects. And the faster the action, the more noticeable they are. But DLSS also had some artifacts when it was introduced, and now it's much more polished. I personally think that DLSS support for this type of cards is much more important than the ability to do ray tracing. So let's try that one next. Let's turn off the frame generation and put DLSS to quality mode. With that, the average frame rate is less impressive, just around 70. But the image overall is much more, let's say, visually stable. Okay, now let's play with rays a little bit. I also set them to alter preset with keeping DLSS in quality mode. That unsurprisingly slashes the frame rate in half. Now the counter shows 40 FPS on average. And before moving to the next game, out of curiosity, let's combine all three of these technologies and take a look at the result. So 1080p, high settings, ultra rays and 4x frame gen. It is so funny to see more than 100 frames per second on the entry-level card with ray tracing enabled, but at the same time we also see artifacts from all of those three technologies. So shimmering on small objects from upscaling, generation glitches and reconstructed rays with denoising. It's maybe not that bad individually, but altogether it's too much for my likings. Also, artifacts are there even with 2x frame gen, just with a lower frame rate. Expedition 33. FullHD with high preset and native resolution. Average frame rate hovers around 60, with some dips to 55–56, and in battles it could go as low as 45, I don't know why. There are probably ways to optimize this part of the game with settings. Then I tried QuadHD with the same settings and native resolution, and I decided to switch on DLSS right away, because 36 FPS is just not enough. With quality mode we can see 55 frames per second on average again. And notice the memory usage. There is still more than 1 GB of free space, almost 1.5. Space Marine 2 in native FullHD can run with Alter preset, but it asks for more memory, and in the game you can see some textures loading right in front of you. So let's keep overall Ultra settings, but drop texture resolution to medium. I can't see any dramatical changes in quality, but now there are no visual glitches. Frame rate is around 60, with rare dips closer to 50 frames per second. And they really aren't noticeable without the counter. So upscaling isn't really necessary. Maybe only if you want rock-solid 60 without changing any other settings. But let's also take a look at QuadHD resolution. There I chose DLSS in quality mode and got very nice and stable 55–65 frames per second on the counter. And what's interesting, there is almost 2 gigs of free memory, both in FullHD and QuadHD tests. So I'm not sure how that is not enough for high resolution textures for this game, but anyway, it looks nice and plays smoothly. Oh, and of course this card can run CS2. These are the settings that the game recommended, and in FullHD there was more than 200 frames per second on average, with dips to 170 with smoke or fire on the screen. In QuadHD average frame rate was around 170, with dips to 130. Also, Apex Legends runs fine. With almost maximum settings, in FullHD frame rate is above 140, with peaks up to 180 and even 200 depending on the area of the map. In QuadHD with the same settings, the frame rate is around 120 to 140 frames per second. Cyberpunk. I chose Ultra preset with no race and upscaling, and definitely wasn't expecting to see 80 to 90 frames per second with some dips to 70. It is exactly what I was talking about in the beginning. Just recently this game was one of the hardest to run, and now it plays smoothly with max settings on entry-level GPU. That's very cool to see, but also that reminds me about the fact that Cyberpunk is already 5 years old. Time flies. If you hate the frame rate, you can enable ray tracing, but I want to just bump the resolution to QuadHD. That increases the load, and now there is only 30 to 40 FPS left. To get back to 60, we will need DLSS in balance mode. And again, look at the memory usage. It's just over 6 gigs, with almost 2 being free. Doom: The Dark Ages in Full HD with Ultra preset is giving us 40 to 50 frames per second. Which isn't bad considering that this game has mandatory and unswitchable ray tracing. Although Ultra is not the highest option in the game, I still think that this is a good result. Then I tried to turn on frame generation, and that gave about 20 FPS boost, but have sent me to the Matrix. Everything was in slow-mo for some reason. DLSS it is then. With quality mode we're also getting around 60 frames per second, and about half of gigabyte of free memory. By the way, I still prefer how this game looked on 1660 Ti, without rays. It was darker, deeper and more contrasty. Unfortunately, I've heard that after the recent patch it is no longer working on non-RT cards. As I said, I tend to like this card, but on a technical level. RTX 5050 could be an amazing new $200 card for 1080p gaming, but I'm not sure if that would ever happen. Unfortunately, now the gaming market is almost an afterthought both for AMD and Nvidia, so they just don't have a real need to compete, especially in the budget segment. And Intel is too busy with just surviving. Practically it's hard to recommend RTX 5050 now, maybe only if you need a new card and for no more than $250. But ideally it should be even cheaper, because there definitely are some interesting options on the used market for that price. And also for 300 you can find a regular 5060, also with 8 gigs of RAM. So what's the point? Anyway, regardless of the price, you saw the performance, so the choice is yours. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Bye!